are a lot of new drivers on the 2023 grid, so I figured I would rank them in a tier list. So I think last year in 2022, I only ranked the drivers in the midway point and at the end of the year. So this year I figured I would rank them at the start of the year to have something to compare them to and see how they improve or fall off throughout the year. So I have 5 categories for each of the drivers: champ material, something missing, all reliable, need to prove, and last chance. Alright, first up I have Alex Albon. I think Albano belongs in all reliable. In last season, he definitely would have been in need to prove, but I think what he was able to do in that Williams proves that he has what it takes to be a consistent midfield driver. After his season and a half at Red Bull, it was looking kind of grim for him, but he's managed to turn his career around and make the most of his opportunity at Williams. I think Alex has shown that he can be a team leader, and we'll see how his relationship with Logan Sargent goes this year. Next up, we have Fernando. And Fernando is someone who was kind of tricky for me to place because he's obviously won as a world champion before, so he obviously doesn't have anything missing in his abilities, but he doesn't have the car to really prove that he's championship material at this current stage. I guess if you were to criticize Fernando, it would be that him burning bridges his entire career is starting to catch up with them and is the reason why he hasn't had an opportunity at a top team. He's definitely able to put in these incredible performances every once in a while, but car reliability has really killed him for a great many years. I think I'm going to throw him ahead of Alex in all reliable because it's really tough to judge where he's at, truly, compared to the drivers who are in the top teams. If Aston Martin are able to do the miraculous and put together a car that has the pace, I have no doubt that Fernando could get the pace out of that car, because he proved in the 2012 Ferrari that he can do wonders with a car that is incredibly difficult to drive. So for now, I'm keeping him in all reliable. Next up is Valtteri Bottas, and Bottas is definitely going in all reliable, just between Alex and Alonso. Bottas is the quintessential number 2 driver, and he's just consistent. He's quick in qualifying, but doesn't really have that edge to him to be able to make him great. And he struggles a little bit in his racecraft. From time to time, I notice that he's not the best at defending and not really the best at overtaking either. But if you need a quick driver, Valtteri is one of your guys. Next up is Nick de Vries. And he's a rookie, so he's going in need to prove. Nick did a great job in that one race at Monza in the Williams. So he has already shown that he can get points in F1 and has the pace. But Monza was one of the one tracks that Williams was good at. And so we don't really know for sure where he's at skill-wise, especially since he probably wasn't in peak physical shape for that race, and that Williams is difficult to drive. So in an AlphaTauri that should be stronger than a Williams, we'll have to see how he's able to handle it. We've seen that he can win in Formula E, he's won Formula 2, so it's just a matter of whether he can do it at Formula 1. So I don't think it's going to take Nick very long to get situated in F1, so we'll just have to see how he performs in the first half of the year. Next up, I have Pierre Gasly. I feel like I have to continue that tradition since Daniel is no longer on the grid. Pierre is at a very interesting spot because he's going to an Alpine team where Esteban is very well established. Pierre was excellent at AlphaTauri, especially in 2020 and 2021. He fell off last year, but I think that was a result of the car not being very good. If Pierre is heavily outperformed by Ocon, I would be worried for him. But I have a feeling that he's going to do really well there. It's going to take him a little bit of time to get used to things, but Pierre is generally a reliable driver. He's able to put in points finishes as long as he has the car to do so. And so I have him in all reliable as well. I think he's a little bit of a stronger driver than Valtteri. He's about equivalent on quali pace, but I think Pierre has a little bit better racecraft than Bottas does. Next up, we have Lewis Hamilton, and Lewis is going straight into champ material. There is no doubt in my mind. As long as Lewis is given a good car, he has a chance at a championship. He has the mentality, he has the pace, he has the raceability, and he has the right amount of aggression. If Mercedes is able to sort their ish out, I feel like they will probably give him a better car this year, and hopefully he'll be in a battle with the other champ material who I will be mentioning later. And I don't think there's any other place you can put a 7-time world champion. Next up is Charles Leclerc. And this might be a little bit controversial, but I'm throwing him in something missing. I love Charles so much. He is now my favorite driver on the grid, and it's by a country mile. I think he is probably the best qualifier on the grid. He has incredible pace. However, Charles has a few things that are holding him back, and I think he really, really needs to sort these things out in 2023 to have a shot at a world championship in the future. I think the things that are holding Charles back is that he loves Ferrari so much, so much, and he holds them in such a high regard that I find that he tends to not want to push back against them. And maybe he does behind the scenes, but at least in the race car, he trusts their decisions way too much. And so on the radio, if he has a thought about a strategy call that he wants to make, and he trusts in his gut that's the right thing to do, he lets his team convince him otherwise. And it has gotten him into so many issues, especially in 2022. I think the biggest examples of this for me are in Brazil, when he probably knew that the Inters were not the right tire to be on, and he should have just gone right back into the pits after that first lap. But he stayed out, and the team tried to call him in, but it was too late. He should have just made that decision for himself. Ferrari might have had to scramble to get him ready, but he should have known Inters are not right in this moment. Put me on softs, and make that decision for himself. The other call in Spa, when he was saying, hey, I don't think I should be coming in to go for this fastest lap. But he went in anyways, even though he probably felt in his gut it wasn't a good move, and then it turned out to not be a very good move, and he lost out the position to Alonso as a result. Charles needs to find that pushback in him, because the team isn't always going to make the right calls, even in championship teams. Charles needs to be able to develop this skill, or else I fear that he's always going to continuously be the one getting screwed over by strategy decisions. And it's just something that he needs to work on if he wants to be a world champion. Once he's able to implement this as a driver, then I'm moving him right into champ material. Like that, I think that's the only thing that's really missing for Charles. Next up is Kevin Magnussen. K-Mag is also going in all reliable. I think a little bit ahead of Alex. K-Mag has been a midfield driver for a great many years, and he's pretty good at it. He's able to get points out of that car when he has the opportunity to. However, Kevin, his aggression gets the better of him sometimes, especially on those first laps. And we saw last year with the 3 meatball flags that he got in first laps. He needs to know when to just accept the cards that he is dealt and just ride it out, because getting into an incident and being sent to the back of the grid removes any ability of getting points. Whereas not going for a move sometimes and just sticking out that position might lead to some points finishes. It might have been bad luck, but he just needs to know what the cast is capable of and try to keep that in mind when he's racing. But he is generally a pretty consistent driver as long as the car is giving him something to work with. Next up, I have Lando Norris. And Lando is also going into something missing. I think until Lando is able to win his first Grand Prix, he'll be in something missing. I think there's a lot of pressure to get that first win. But once you get it, I think it relaxes you in a way so that you're not always thinking about it. I think this is an issue that we see with other drivers such as Hülkenberg, where he just gets into his own head about the fact that he doesn't have a podium and then he screws up. And the longer and longer it goes on that Lando doesn't have a race win, the more and more I worry about him. Other than that, he's missing a good race car. And I worry sometimes that his loyalty to McLaren is going to mean that he's going to lose out at the chance of a championship. I don't know if they're going to be able to give him a good enough car until 2025. And by that point, it might be a little bit too late to retain Lando's services. Because if he's not seeing the progression in the team, he might want to move on. But I don't think there'll be any team out there in which he would be the number one driver if he wanted to move up to the top teams. And he'd have to really, really prove himself and push hard to be able to have a chance. So it's in a really, really tough spot for Lando right now. But I think it's the mentality thing that he needs to still work on a little bit, because he's extremely consistent, rarely gets into any incidents, and very quick and consistently the best of the midfield. So I think Lando just needs a few tweaks to be able to be championship material. Next up is Bestie, and Esteban is also going in all reliable. It's a popular category. Esteban has proven to be a very consistent driver. He knows how to keep it steady and aim for those 8th or 9th place positions in that Alpine, and then occasionally things happen and he's able to nab a higher position on the grid. The thing I worry about with Esteban is that he doesn't necessarily have the pace in qualifying. And unfortunately, I think Esteban has been in the sport long enough where I think he's kind of shown what he is capable of, and I don't know if it will ever be enough to be a world champion. I think Esteban would make a fantastic second driver, which is why I think he might be at the top of my list for taking that Mercedes second seat if Lewis were ever to retire, because I know that Mercedes do not want to risk having a 1A, 1B situation like a Lewis Rosberg and it blowing up in their faces. So I think Esteban is a contender for that second driver role. Next up is Sergio Perez, and Sergio is also going in all reliable. Checo, in the Racing Point, we were finally starting to see him really, really come into his own, and that's the reason that he got that second driver seat at Red Bull. I think at the start of last season, I would have put him in something missing, but unfortunately, he just got absolutely obliterated by Max last year. And I think it's just shown the weaknesses that Checo has as a driver. He's a fantastic street track driver, and he's obviously incredible at defending and incredible at tire management, but he doesn't have the overall pace or the true number one driver mentality to be able to take a championship. And as long as Max is at Red Bull, he's never going to win a championship, so he's not championship material. Sorry, Checo. I love you so much, but it's kind of the truth. Next up is Oscar Piastri, and Piastri is also going in need to prove. He's a rookie, and so that's kind of where all the rookies are going to be going, as a little spoiler alert. Oscar, I honestly don't know very much about. He won the F2 championship before I became a fan of F1, so I haven't seen him at the peak I think Oscar has the potential to be an incredible driver. And depending on how this first season goes, I could definitely see him moving up to something missing. He's up against Lando, which is going to be an incredibly difficult test for him. But I think he's going to do pretty decent. I think he'll be a little bit off Lando's pace, but I think he'll close the gap by the end of the year. And we'll see how things level out there. I just have him in this category because he's a rookie, and even the best rookies, you never 100% know how they're going to do when they get to the big leagues. There is just something about Oscar, though, that I think he'll be okay. I think he has, you just look at him sometimes and he has like dead eyes, and he just like, there's something going on there. And I think he has the potential to have that killer instinct and be able to be a champion one day. But for now, we will see how this season goes. Next up is Carlos Sainz. And Carlos is going in something missing. I think Carlos is probably the most intelligent driver on the grid now, or at least the most like engineer-like would be the term I would use, like analytical. I just get the sense that he is an extremely logical thinker, very good at knowing kind of what's going on in the race, and he's made some fantastic strategy calls on his own. But I think Carlos is lacking pace. It's been shown in 2022 that when both Charles and Carlos are competing in a race, Charles is always going to have the upper hand because he just has the pace. And I think Carlos will hopefully have figured out the Ferrari at this point, and hopefully it won't take him as long in this upcoming season to get to grips with the new car. But I just think that he's always going to be a step behind Charles, and that is what is missing from him being championship material. I honestly think if you could combine Charles and Carlos, you would have the perfect driver. You had Charles' pace and Carlos's analytical skills. Next up, I have Logan Sargent. And I think of the three rookies coming in this year, he's the one who has the most to prove. However, I think that he doesn't qualify for last chance because I feel like Williams will give him a few years at least to show his true potential, unless he is worse than Latifi. But honestly, I don't think anyone could be worse than Latifi. I am very curious to see how Logan does. I don't know much about him, similar to Oscar. I think he finished 4th in F2, which isn't fantastic, but Joe didn't do super well either, and he seems to be a very capable driver. So we'll see. You never truly know with rookies, but he needs to show that he's better than Latifi, and that's what he needs to prove this year. As long as he manages to do that, I think he'll be okay. Next up is Lance Stroll, and I have him in need to prove as well. Oh, come on. Ooh, put him ahead of Nick DeVries. Here we go. And Lance is such a difficult driver for me, because every once in a while he puts in a performance that is absolutely incredible and you're like, where the heck did this come from? But the other 90% of the time he just seems like he's phoning it in. And this year in particular, being up against Fernando Alonso is going to really show whether or not he is worth a seat in F1. Lance needs to prove that he can keep up with Fernando. If he's able to do that, I think he will finally put an end to the comments of pay driver. Well, he'll never get rid of the comments of pay driver, but I think he'll get rid of the comments that he's not worthy of an F1 seat. However, if he is absolutely demolished by Alonso, we need to have serious talks about his position in F1. Next up is Yuki Tsunoda, and I unfortunately have Yuki in last chance. Most rookies are given a shelf life of 3 years. Yuki's had 2 of those years, and while he has proven that on his day he can be quick, he has also shown that he can make some absolutely boneheaded mistakes. And this got better in 2022. but he still hasn't completely eliminated them. And I really, really worry for Yuki that if he's not able to finally stamp all of those out this year, I think he's going to be gone, especially with a huge crop of really good drivers in F2 this year in the Red Bull Junior program. Unless Yuki is able to fully take control of this team and beat Nick DeVries and show that he has the consistency needed to be an F1 driver, I think he might be out by the end of the year. As much as I love Yuki, but that's unfortunately kind of where his career's at now. All right, next up, Max Verstappen. Do I even need to say it? He is championship material. There's no doubt about it. He is by far the best driver on the grid right now. As long as the Red Bull is within spitting distance of the fastest car on the grid, or is the fastest car on the grid, there is no way that anyone else is taking the championship from his fingers. The one weakness that Max has is his aggression against Lewis. That's literally it. He has managed to balance out when to really push things and when not to. He's an incredibly quick qualifier. He's incredibly good in the wets, and his team rarely ever lets him down. So he's virtually unbeatable at this point, and unless his car is severely impacted, he's always going to be in a battle for the championship until he decides to hang up his racing boots, which could be sooner than we think. Next up is Zhou Guanyu. And Zhou, I'm putting at the lower end of need to prove. I don't think he's quite at last chance because his rookie season was very solid, and he just had the unfortunate situation of adjusting to F1 when that Alfa Romeo was quick, and then by the time he felt truly settled, the car had lost its ability to be a points finisher. Zhou has shown that he can be consistent, and he is fairly mistake-proof, which is really good for a rookie. I just worry that he might not have the pace. So this year he really needs to, from the get-go, be on pace with Valtteri to be able to stay in F1. If he's once again behind the 8 ball, then I worry that his seat might get taken by Théo Pourchaire by the end of the year, especially if Théo manages to finally win F2. But I do have him below the rookies because I think he's kind of hanging on that edge of being at risk for losing his seat, whereas the other rookies have a little bit more leeway. Next up is Nico Hülkenberg, and I have Nico in last chance. I think that, as controversial as it is, I think Haas did make the right decision in dropping Mick for him. What Haas needs are people who can reliably put the car in points, and Nico has proven to be that driver in the past. However, he hasn't been in F1 for 3 seasons now, I think, apart from those one-off races that he's done over COVID. And I just don't know if he still has the pace in him to be able to be an F1 driver. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, and maybe he'll be at Kevin's level, and then he'll be thrown right into reliable. But if Nico is too far off Kevin's pace, I think he'll be out by the end of the year. And finally, we have Mr. George Russell. And George is also going in something missing, but I think I'm putting him below Lando. George is an interesting character. Last season, I saw a different side of him. And that side of him was basically Max Verstappen circa 2018, where he was a little bit too aggressive and wouldn't know when to back out of a move, especially on first laps. I think George has a good head on his shoulders, but he tends to not trust his team enough. He kind of has the opposite problem of Charles, where he needs to trust that the team is making the right decision instead of doing silly things like going on to slicks way too early at Singapore, or insisting to go on slicks in Canada to do his lap when it definitely wasn't the right conditions for it. he takes risks, but the risks haven't been really paying off yet. I do think, though, that George has the ability to be a world champion. I think he just needs to sort out those little tweaks in his driving, because I think racing at Williams for so many years, he hasn't fully managed to master wheel-to-wheel racing yet. And once he gets that, he's championship material for sure. So that is where I have the drivers for the start of the 2023 season, and we'll see how this changes by the midpoint. Give it a like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this tier list video. I'll be probably doing another couple in the next few weeks here as we get ready for the 2023 season. Bye!